I'd like to talk about self-harm and grief in this video. But before we jump into that, I would like to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Ghazala at the Heart and Soul Cafe. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. I really do appreciate it. And if you've been here, if you're here for the first time, then you're very welcome. Thank you for dropping by. Self-harm. Well, let me start off by explaining what self-harm is. Self-harm is when someone intentionally injures their body in some way. Self-harm is not a mental health condition in itself. It is a behavior. Okay? So it's not a mental health condition. It's a behavior. It's when someone has overwhelming emotional pain and they turn that pain into physical pain because they feel that their physical pain is easier to digest or bear than their emotional pain. Okay, so types of self-harm. What kind of self-harm is there? Well, there's cutting, burning, punching oneself or punching the wall, poisoning. And if you suspected someone's taken any kind of poison, you would make sure that they get medical attention straight away. It might mean provoking fights or picking fights, or getting hurt that way, perhaps, or pulling hair, so hair pulling, and more commonly known as Rapunzel syndrome. So someone may turn to that. Overeating, undereating, over tattooing can sometimes, and I know in most cases over tattooing would be seen as art form, and which it is, but it can sometimes be seen as a form of self-harm. Over piercing can be seen as a form of self-harm too, in some cases, not in all cases, in some cases. Over body modifications can be seen as a form of self-harm too. So there's lots of different types of self-harm that we can sort of talk about. When it comes to myself and my own experiences, the only type of self-harm that I can relate to, that I've actually experienced in my own life as a result of losing my son 4 years ago, is the eating. In the days straight after losing my son, could not eat as a result of the overwhelming emotion and the pain that I was in. I don't think I felt that I chose not to eat. I just actually physically couldn't eat because I felt as if I had this lump in my throat because of the emotion. I couldn't swallow, and therefore, that's how it affected me there. So I didn't actually choose to do that. I couldn't do it. So in weeks that followed, I found myself sometimes not eating at all, just skipping meals, or just not thinking it was important really anymore, which could be seen as a form of self-harm. Or other times I felt that I was overeating, I was emotionally eating, I was looking for some kind of comfort somewhere in my life because I had lost everything. I felt that I'd lost everything and I needed some kind of comfort. It wasn't something that stayed with me for very long. I think it was more like 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And after that period, I felt that I put things into place and came back to my old habits, if you like, of eating. I do remember talking to a friend and admitting it to a friend and almost like feeling a little bit ashamed of my overeating, because you can get quite secretive about things. You can sort of hide food or hide wrappers, that kind of thing, and you sort of feel as if you're some kind of, you've got this guilt thing about you, because, well, that this is food that you don't actually need. You're eating it for other reasons. You don't actually need to eat that much food. So it's, again, and by admitting it to a friend, I felt that for the first time it sort of left my head and came to the tip of my tongue, and my ears actually heard myself saying that I do sometimes emotionally overeat, and that in itself had a positive effect. and sort of, it was like brought it out into the open, and I felt that I felt as if it was like the bubble burst, if you like, and I didn't feel that I any longer had the problem moving forward. And so it helped me overcome it by just admitting it to somebody, admitting it to a friend. So there's all different kinds of types of self-harm. So for me, it didn't come to the fact that I felt that I needed, any kind of positive, sort of professional help on that. But some of you know that I do counsel, support women who have experienced child loss. I do see types of self-harm in others. Sometimes I see it in children. So if a child has lost their sibling, you can see self-harm there. Because I think the main reason there is children sometimes can find it difficult to communicate, to articulate their emotions, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing when they maybe have lost their brother or sister, perhaps. And then if as a result of that building up of overwhelming emotion, they can maybe turn that emotion, mental, emotion into sort of physical, and that pain into physical pain. So emotional pain into physical pain is what I'm trying to say. All right. So we do see that more in children than we see in adults. Again, turning to alcohol or drug misuse as a result of the loss of someone is something that we see quite a lot of as well. I will talk about alcohol and drug misuse in a future video, because I think we need to address that in itself. What else? I see people where people have overdosed on medication that they maybe have been given by a doctor for other symptoms. So it could be depression or anxiety. It could be other conditions like for sleeping. So a doctor might have prescribed somebody some medication to help them sleep, perhaps, and they've overdosed on that. So that could be sort of seen as a form of self-harm as well. So there's all kind of things that we can see in people when it comes to self-harm. So let's share some minimization techniques. If you know of someone who is self-harming, or you might be able to put this into place for yourself, perhaps. If you have the urge to self-harm, you might try something like you get an elastic band. So place an elastic band around your wrist, and when you get the urge to self-harm, you actually pull the elastic band back and allow it to snap back on your wrist, and that might help alleviate the urge to actually self-harm. Okay, you might get a red pen, this is a blue one, but you might get a red pen and ask that person to, draw around their wrist, or you might do that, for yourself, around your wrist with a red pen, and that might help to alleviate urges of self-harm. You might be able to do that with a block of ice, so an ice cube. Rub that ice cube around the wrist. That might help to alleviate the urge to self-harm, or rub that ice cube on the back of the neck, perhaps. It's just to sort of jolt you out of that mindset, that thinking, which might be quite a sort of an active sort of thinking, might become more passive quite quickly. So it could be, lemon, perhaps, segment of lemon, just sucking on that might help to just jolt you out of the urge to self-harm. So there's lots and lots of minimization techniques that we could look at. There's also apps as well. There's Calm Harm, which is an app that you could download on your phone, I believe. So you could try that, and that gives you more techniques as well, and gives you some more information about self-harm and what it looks like, and why people do turn to it as a coping. As it is, it's a coping mechanism for something that's so overwhelming for that person, and and it's that turning that emotional pain into physical pain. You don't really want to take that control away from someone. So from a child, that wouldn't be really a good idea, in that it might force them, push them into something worse, like possibly suicidal ideations, that kind of thing. And I'll talk about suicide in another video, probably, possibly not just one video, but I will do that. So it's something that you allow that person to keep because it is a coping mechanism, but you need to treat that person sort of holistically and look at that person holistically, because there's an underlying struggle that that person is struggling with, which is leading them to self-harm. Okay, so we don't want to really focus on the self-harm itself. We want to focus on the person, holistically, and if it's, again, if it comes to that person's, let's say they're cutting themselves and it becomes infected and the wounds don't heal because that person is picking on those wounds, and if it becomes a real problem, then that person needs to maybe maybe that person needs to go along to see their doctor, or you escort someone, sort of escort somebody, but what's the word I'm thinking of? You go along with them to give them support, moral support, and try and get them the help that they need, right, if it's an ongoing problem. Right. So I hope this video has been of help to you. If you know of somebody who is self-harming, maybe you could share this video with them. Otherwise, please like, subscribe, share, comment. That would be great. Again, my goal for this platform, for this YouTube channel, is to create a platform, to create a space, a safe space where we can have conversations around grief, around bereaving, around mental health and how it might impact us in our lives, and have each other's back, and offer each other a shoulder to cry on, perhaps, or an ear, so allow someone to talk, and so we can offer to listen. Okay, and I think that's what this is all about. So thank you so much for coming by again. I do so appreciate it. I can't even tell you in words what it means to me. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again here in my next video. Until then, bless your hearts and souls. Thank you.